This session is part of the Indie Author Fringe Conference, a 3 times a year author conference fringe to the major publishing fairs London Book Fair, Book Expo America and Frankfurt Book Fair. The Indie Author Fringe is run under the stewardship of the Alliance of Independent Authors, is organised by writers for writers and is free to attend. Let's see who's sharing self-publishing insights in this session.
Hello, I'm Debbie Young. I'm the Commissioning Editor of the Alliance of Independent Authors Author Advice Centre, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the results of an informal survey that I did earlier in the year, asking our author members to nominate their favourite writing tool. Now, my question was deliberately open-ended so that they could interpret it in whichever way they wanted, whether to talk about modern software or old technology, or however they wanted to respond. Now, although Scottish crime writer Wendy Jones set a frighteningly high bar with her initial nomination of her MacBook, which cost thousands of dollars, most of the tools that we're going to be talking about are either relatively low cost or indeed free. Although lots of people did nominate high technology resources such as particular software programs, there were also equally ardent shout-outs in smaller numbers for pencil and paper and other old-fashioned tools, particularly for writing down the first draft. So let's kick off with the most popular nomination and start at the top end of the technology spectrum. And most of you will probably have guessed this was going to be Scrivener. That is a software system which is designed by a company called literatureandlatte.com, which is certainly a winning title for authors. Scrivener was designed particularly for authors to write books with, whether fiction or non-fiction, and that sets it apart from word processing software for the mass market, which is generally designed for business use, for letters and correspondence and for reports and for domestic correspondence as well. So Scrivener's been designed particularly for writing books of book length, and as Ian Sutherland, a Scottish IT expert whose thrillers happen to be set in the world of computer crime, puts it, stop trying to write huge manuscripts in Word. It wasn't designed for that use. So use Scrivener to break your book down into chapters and scenes, which you can reorganise as your plot starts to twist nicely. Thus spake the thriller writer, and I think that sums it up very well. Books are much more complex than most business documents, as well as being longer, and that flexibility is really key to why so many love it so much. One of the many distinguishing features of Scrivener is the range of options for viewing your work in progress, which includes a cute virtual corkboard where you can pin virtual index cards and reshuffle them to your heart's content. There are also sections for organising research, character notes, images, inspirations, any other kind of jotting, all to be kept in one convenient place, everything to do with your work in progress in one place on one screen, rather than having lots of windows and programs open. Pretty much everyone agreed that Scrivener boosts productivity by helping you to organise your writing better, and it also gives you an ability to track your work in progress, and that's one of the reasons I think that people said how much more fun it made their writing. The corkboard's definitely fun, and another gadget that I particularly like that several respondents mentioned is the little word count tracker, which it's optional. You can bring it up and put it in a corner of your screen, and there's a coloured progress bar on there that changes colour from red through amber to green as you near your goal. You set your own goal, whether for a writing session, for your book overall, for your writing day, or whatever. And it's very motivating in the same way that these little fitness monitors like Fitbits are motivating to get you to complete your designated numbers of steps. You find yourself adding in extra little walks if you have a fitness monitor as you reach bedtime and you haven't finished your 10,000 paces or whatever. Well, the word counting widget on Scrivener does the same for me as well as for others. Now, interestingly, some authors commented that it actually improves not just the quantity and the organisation, but the way they write. R.M. Mulkey, who writes thrillers and young adult suspense stories, says, "It makes me write more correctly so that I need less editing or proofreading. It's the perfect tool for the disorganised or the OCD writer. It keeps my chaos contained and will allow you to label your work out to your heart's desire." So I think that's a great point there. It's a piece of software that suits all different kinds of writers, whether you're ultra organised or whether you know you're disorganised and need to improve your organisation. It also has value for people who are creating a book from many different sources. Now, Christine Frost, who is an American author of historical and speculative fiction, also uses it for short stories. And if you're compiling a collection of short stories, it's really good because it enables you to move them around until you've curated your stories in just the right order, whether they're all by you or you're creating an anthology. Having everything in one place also reduces the chance of being tempted by distractions if you haven't got to go over to look something up on a different programme. Now, I'm very impressed by Karen Meyer's discipline. She is an American author who's written all of her fantasy and sci-fi novels on Scrivener, and she even uses a separate computer that has almost nothing else installed on it apart from Scrivener, so that she can't get distracted. Australian thriller writer Rachel Amphlett replied to say she's written all of 7 of her most recent books using Scrivener, and it still helps her outline, write, revise and keep on top of her productivity goals with one accessible and affordable tool. Now, accessible and affordable, those are really 2 important points, especially when you're starting out in self-publishing and are likely to be on a tight budget. That Rachel is now a successful international bestseller and is still using it and singing its praises is further evidence that Scrivener can be all things to all writers at all stages of their self-publishing journey. Susanna Linton first came across Scrivener when she got a discounted offer on it when she was doing NaNoWriMo, which of course is all about word counts and getting your draft out come what may. She says what she likes about it is its reliability. You don't have to worry about it crashing because your document's got too big. That feeling of security is really important when you're getting out your precious first draft, feeling you've captured your words forever. But it's not just when you're writing your first draft that it's helpful. Jill Harris, who writes sci-fi, points out that what she loves is that getting an overview of your work in progress so that you can step back and assess how you're doing all on a single screen. And that gives you a degree of objectivity, which can be really helpful when you're editing or if you're stuck at a sticking point in your plot. So you can bring it all up, have the card index view up there with all your material and step back, and it's kind of like having a bit of an out-of-body experience as a writer in that you're looking down on it with a bit more objectivity. Now, although we've been discussing Scrivener as a writing tool, because that was, after all, the point of the survey, it's worth pointing out that some of the respondents particularly highlighted the facility it offers to format your ebooks all within one with the same piece of software. So you don't even have to go elsewhere to do your formatting of ebooks. Claire Flynn, who is the author of 5 historical novels writing in England, she points out that you can use it to compile your work for other formats, not just for ebooks when you come to publishing time, but you can also transfer it very easily into a seamless Word document if your beta reader, your editor, wants a Word document to work on with track changes and all the things that offers. Both American novelist Mary Crawford and British sci-fi and fantasy author Tim Lewis love using it for formatting ebooks, and Janet Powell, who writes crime thrillers, loved the formatting so much when she came to learn Scrivener to write her 3rd book, Book of Hours. Not only did she format it there, she also imported her previous 2 books so that she could reformat them in the same style, so to give her books uniform branding. Now, I haven't done that myself yet, although I'm now writing in Scrivener all the time. I prefer to export to Word for final editing, beta reading and formatting, as many of the other respondents said. But it's good to know that there are facilities for that if you want to go back and learn how to do them later on. As with so many software systems, most people reported using only a subset of Scrivener's tools, but there are always more to learn if you want to. As Karen Myers put it, it has no more complexity than you need and just enough so as to let you concentrate on your writing. And that's, after all, that's what we're all about, really, isn't it? Although it's not difficult to learn, it does take a little bit of getting used to because it's got different jargon to a conventional word processor. But there is an entry level of basic functions that you can use, and there are lots of ways in which you can learn about it, including the help manual that's provided with it. There are online videos on YouTube and elsewhere. And my personal favourite is a book called Scrivener for Dummies, which is by Gwen Hernandez. Now, I like to learn by reading. Other people learn best by videos or listening or just by doing, and all those options are there for you. But as Amy Shojai, an American thriller writer, sums it up, Scrivener's pretty much dummy proof, which is always good to know. And last point on Scrivener now, or penultimate point on Scrivener, is that Kat Fater, an American author of romantic suspense, who has used Scrivener for all 5 in her London Calling series, points out that it changes the way you perceive yourself as a writer as well, and says, if you want to be a professional writer, then use professional software design for writers. And I think it's quite nice. You feel kind of like you've joined a writer's club when you start using Scrivener, that you're walking the walk, you're doing what writers do, and it gives you a feeling of validation, which is particularly useful reassurance when you're at the early part of your journey. So that is just about enough about Scrivener, except to sum up by saying that a phrase that comes up quite often when people are talking about Scrivener is that it's life-changing. Finnish novelist Helena Halma, who has I think 5 or 6 novels to her name now, says, using Scrivener has completely revolutionised the way I write. So if you haven't already looked at Scrivener yet, I'm hoping that all that feedback from our members might make you at least have a look at it. But as the BBC likes to say, in the interests of non-bias, other writing software programs are also available. This isn't meant to be a plug for Scrivener, it's just honest feedback from the survey, for questions that I put out. Now, another software system that many authors responded to the survey raving about is Vellum, which is currently for Mac users only, but it's in development to provide a system that will help you format print books as well as ebooks. Because it's for Mac users only, PC users like me aren't very familiar with it for obvious reasons, but it's meant to be really, really good for if you have a Mac. British author and illustrator Alex Hallett, who writes humour books, picture books and children's chapter books, particularly likes it because it's good at making her picture books, but also says it makes producing beautiful ebooks child's play. And I know historical thriller writer David Penny is also a huge Vellum enthusiast and uses it to produce effortlessly elegant interiors that match the stunning covers of his medieval murder mysteries. And I think when you've got a beautiful cover, you want a beautiful interior as well. Now, to be honest, I wouldn't have counted Vellum as a writing tool because people tend to use it more for formatting than just for writing. But as so many people are passionate about it, it would have seemed churlish to leave out the responses for the purposes of this survey. So now, although I wasn't surprised to find Scrivener and Vellum nominated by so many people, there were a couple of surprises in store that some people nominated software that I'd never even heard of, so you might want to take a look at these as well. Welsh writer Carl Drinkwater recommended something called Write Monkey. That's Write, WRITE, separate word, monkey. And he says it's great for getting down your first draft without any distractions. And he's using it for his 2 current works in progress, which so far are over 100,000 words. And he writes in lots of different genres: contemporary, literary fiction, horror and sci-fi. So he's obviously giving it a good testing in lots of different ways. The other surprise software that I hadn't heard of came from J.J. Franklin, who writes psychological crime thrillers, and her background's in script writing. And she says she learned about a script writing software called Final Draft, which she learned about on a course specialising in writing for television. And she's used it for her first 2 books, Echoes of Justice and Urge to Kill, and she's currently using it for the 3rd book. So she says it sounds to me as if it's a bit like Scrivener in that it's got index cards and you can track and outline chapters and set up storyboards, obviously a very televisual thing. And she says it's also got features where you can work out where a scene turns. Again, very, very televisual, and it sounds like it would be a good asset for fiction writers as well. So that one was Final Draft. Now, I guess it's inevitable that few people would have given a shout out to good old Microsoft Word that has been around for eons. We're all very familiar with it from day jobs and from other parts of our lives. And although Scrivener advocates are often quite dismissive of Word, and as going back to what Ian Sutherland said at the beginning, it's not really designed for writing books, it's still clearly working for some people. So if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Alison Clifford, who writes romantic suspense books in Australia, she says she loves it because it's adaptable and it's everywhere. She also likes the way the set styles make formatting easy, and I agree with her on that point. For formatting print books in particular, the styles feature is very good and easy to get to grips with. Another respondent, who preferred to remain anonymous but who writes historical fiction, sci-fi and non-fiction, said that she starts the work in Scrivener but exports it to Word for the final polish and edit. Another software, which is beloved of many members, is from a company called Nuance, and it's called Dragon voice recognition software. Now, it can be used in conjunction with just about anything else, whether you're writing in Scrivener, Word, or social media, or just anything else that you happen to be doing. And it's a dictation software enabling you to get your words from inside your head onto the screen, so that you can then use your words anywhere else. And it's particularly useful for people who have physical health problems, but it's also becoming increasingly used by writers who just find that's an easier way to get their words out there. Many people balk at dictation until they've tried it, and Joanna Penn is famously one such convert, as she's been moving over to dictation and raving about it in the last year or so. Now, Dragon's prices vary according to which version you want, and you pay more for the version that will download files from remote devices, such as a handheld digital recorder or smartphone. So before you buy it, just check that the one that you're buying matches the way in which you plan to use it. Again, it's another system that I've heard writers describe as life-changing, either because of making physical problems making conventional typing tricky for them, or because once they get into the swing of dictating, they realise they can produce more words per hour than by other means. US author and social media consultant Barb Drozdovich, who has carpal tunnel in both wrists, had a nice way of putting it. She's come up with the catchphrase, "Use Dragon to talk your book to completion." So that sounds quite nice, coaxing your words out of yourself. British novelist Lynn Pardoe raised the point that hadn't occurred to me about dictation. She says, as well as providing more speed, it provides accuracy when you can't spell something, which I think is rather great if you're not naturally a good speller. She came across it because it was recommended actually by a professional workplace occupational therapist because she has trouble with her hands. So while many people come to Dragon for health reasons, if you try it, you may find it's a boon for you too. Now, I was convinced to use Dragon a little while ago, and while I don't use it all the time, and I prefer not to use it for long fiction writing, which I still do by hand, I do find it really useful for dictating short functional pieces like blog posts that are more or less already formed in my head, for news items or for short stories, and for recording notes as I'm out and about. So I carry a handheld digital voice recorder in my bag, which I use as a little sort of notepad. And when I get home, I plug it into my computer, and Dragon quietly chugs away and transcribes it when I get back to my desk. So I think I'm grateful to Orna Ross for putting me onto it initially. I know that she uses Dragon for email, social media, and all sorts of things, as well as writing. So if you've ever wondered how Orna does so much in one person's hours in the day, that must be at least part of the answer. It's because she's another convert to dictating. Now, I had another surprise from my survey here, in that Cindy Rinneman Marsh, who's an American creative writing teacher and an author herself, she nominated as her favourite writing tool her printer. Now, that seemed a bit counterintuitive at first, because all the printer does is print out what you've already written, but she meant it in the sense of helping her to edit and refine her prose. And I've got a lovely long quote to read from her here about her relationship with her printer. So here we go. "It brings into the physical world the things I've created on a computer, giving me something tangible to interact with as I edit and reconsider. It's especially ideal to take a print out into the world, to a coffee shop, or just onto my own front porch or in front of the fire. Armed with a notebook, a pencil or pen, and a nice surface to write on, I have it. I become my own beta reader. I think of how I used to be delighted with a nice IBM Selectric typewriter I had access to in grad school that could bring my handwritten drafts into a new form for objective review. But my grad school self would have been dumbfounded at the idea of being able to make multiple printouts and small changes with so little effort." Thank you, Cindy, for that really thoughtful contribution. I have to say, I often wonder how the likes of Tolstoy ever managed without the resources that we have available, writing long drafts by hand. So Cindy's reminiscence about her IBM typewriter from grad school leads me nicely on to the non-technical favourites, of which quite a few were nominated. Now, we mustn't rush to call the guys who nominated these Luddites, because they all have really good reasons for their choices, not least the feeling that writing by hand allows them to tap more effectively into their subconscious, into the kind of the mystical side of writing. Sarah Bannum, a British author who writes in various genes, says rather poetically, "I enjoy the relationship between my fingers and creating the shape of each letter. So go back to basics and remind yourself of the enjoyment and learning about shapes to communicate." Thank you, Sarah. I think that's rather lovely. And there's certainly something very primal and instinctive about that feeling. And it's a great reminder of the magic we have at our fingertips of writing and creating worlds from within our own heads, which, of course, are pretty non-mechanical devices themselves. Even in our digital age, children still learn to write first with pencil and paper. When I was a child, it was a real rite of passage to master handwriting enough to be allowed to use a pen in class. You really arrived when you were allowed your pen licence, and that still holds true today. My daughter was very proud when she got hers. Pencil and paper still have huge appeal for many writers, even for someone like Dr. Carol Cooper, British novelist who's also author of technical and medical books. In her day job as a medical doctor, she engages with technology all the time, of course, but she's nothing if not practical about pencil and paper. As she says, you can take it everywhere, and it doesn't need electricity. Anne Stormont, who writes contemporary and children's fiction in the UK, is very specific about her requirements, although, as does everybody else, she transfers all her work onto digital format eventually. She says, "I couldn't manage without the real thing of physical writing. It makes it feel more immediate, tapping into another part of my brain and imagination. It also enables me to plan better because it sticks in my memory." Thank you, Anne. That's a really interesting point. Now, adding a touch of class to the low-tech toolbox is Thomas Sheppard, who's a British writer of fantasy and magical realism novels. His favourite writing tools are not pencil and paper, but fountain pen and an elegant leather-wrapped journal. He gets through 2 journals per novel, which he finds excellent value. Of his favourite tools, he says, they never crash, they never run out of batteries, you can use them anywhere, and they help you get fantastic service in restaurants. Now there's something I'd never thought of. I must try that. I was glad to see I wasn't the only author in the survey to profess a deep affection for moleskin notebooks, which are slimmer than Thomas's medieval-looking volumes and beloved of artists and writers for around 2 centuries. Claire Flynn, who likes to write in ink, says the moleskin paper is particularly good for writing with ink. And I think there's also something deeply romantic about knowing you're using the same kind of notebook as Vincent van Gogh or Bruce Chatwin or Pablo Picasso. So my intention is not so much to make recommendations to identify absolute rights or wrongs for writing tools, but to demonstrate that there's more than one way to write a book. If you haven't explored some of these other options, even if you are a big fan of one of them, I suggest that you have a go with the others, especially if you're finding yourself stuck with a particular piece of writing. Now, at the end of March, I'm going to pick a favourite comment at the bottom of this post, and I will be sending a moleskin notebook to whoever has added, to a random person chosen from whoever has added comments at the end of the post. So if you'd like to tell me what your favourite tool is, to share a tip, or it might even be a rant against a tool that people use that you don't think they should be using, if you have a better way of sharing with people, we'd love to hear about it. So thank you to everybody for listening. As I say, I will send a moleskin notebook to a random commenter chosen at the end of March, and I hope that the moleskin notebook, if it was good enough for Picasso and Ernest Hemingway, that you'll like it too. Thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the Indie Author Fringe. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to another great session brought to you by the Indie Author Fringe and the Alliance of Independent Authors, ALLi. You can find out more about both by visiting ALLi's Self-Publishing Advice Centre, www.selfpublishingadvice.org. Now, go write and publish.